Advocate Sinel, firstly, thank you for the interview. You obviously heard the speech from the retiring bailiff, William Bailhache, last week before. What's your reaction?
I wasn't present, but I did read it on your blog, watch it on your blog, as it were.
And your reaction to it?
Duplicitous and totally inappropriate. I think look back in history to get the reasons for it. But firstly, endorsing Graham Power and Lenny Harper, I mean, you know, we cannot take that as being a serious statement of what he really thinks. You've got to remember that Graham Power was pushed out because, and with Bailhache's help, because he was not going to play politics, and the politics that William Bailhache was urging was sit on the child abuse inquiry and get rid of Stuart Sivray for agitating in relation to it. I mean, this is very serious stuff, because if you may remember, when Graham Power came over to the island to give evidence to the inquiry, special precautions were taken in case Mr. Bailhache had organised his arrest in some fashion. Lenny Harper refused to come, and there was at one stage a threat of arrest for Lenny Harper, so it just doesn't tally, does it?
Well, that was my sort of next question, if you like. Unbelievably,
I think what's worse, well, just as bad as all of that, is that the Constitutional Convention has always been that law and politics are separate. Well, over here they are absolutely entwined, and it has a detrimental effect upon the island's reputation and on the quality of justice. No two ways about it. And there we have the bailiff being as political can be. But if you look in relation to the motivation of it and the criticism of the care inquiry, what happened historically was that his brother gave that appalling Liberation Day speech.
Philip Bailhache, he was a bailiff in 2008. When
UK government became aware of it, he was gone within minutes. Now, you may remember all of this in the mainstream media. I mean, you can't make it up over here, can you? Channel Television did a little skit, and they got the lieutenant, not the lieutenant governor, but not the lieutenant governor before, but the one before that, so he'd been out of office for 6-9 years, to come along and say, no, it's a voluntary resignation, and no, he hasn't been pressured. Well, you know, he retired on grounds of ill health and then ran for election very shortly thereafter. It's very difficult not to join the dots between the Liberation Day speech and his retirement, in inverted commas, within a matter of days.
So you think Philip Bailhache as bailiff was pushed rather than jumped?
Yeah.
Interesting. So, because going back to the...
Well, that's why you've got William Bailhache now trying to do his bit for the Bailhache clan, as it were. And trying to sort of rewrite history. And rewrite history, I mean, how he could say all those things, having done all of those things in relation to Mr. Power and Mr. Harper. I mean, we've got this bizarre position over here where you have high-ranking policemen being undermined by the Attorney General.
He was, according to the former senior investigating officer Lenny Harper, as Attorney General, as William Bailhache was then, he was obstructing prosecutions. That's according to Lenny Harper. So it doesn't bode well that he's sort of vindicating Lenny Harper now, does it? It's not. Is it a genuine vindication like you've obviously said?
I don't think it can be. But hold on a minute. I'm sure I saw it somewhere that he wanted to have Lenny Harper arrested over a notebook or something. Do you remember all that?
I think they were trying to do him for data protection.
Some nonsense. You know, Graham Power had his own file sort of locked locked up and then taken away from him. I mean, stop.
Well, it was Operation, what was it? I've forgotten the name of it now, but they wanted Graham Power all over the Curtis Warren affair. They wanted Graham Power, he was criminally investigated. I've forgotten the name, Operation... But yeah, they did want...
The Curtis Warren things is another example of William Bailhache undermining policemen. I mean, the Privy Council was lit up a garden path. I've always said that. I mean, you may remember that when they ran the disciplinary process later on, I acted for the policemen.
That's right. They couldn't find anybody else that would act for the policemen and go against the state, if I remember.
No, they had somebody. That's not quite accurate, but it's interesting how the policemen reached me, which was that they were actually in some disarray and not happy with their counsel, and they reached out to Lord Carswell And he said, go and see Philip Sinel. That's how they got to me.
Right, but nobody was keen to take on and to defend the cops. No, there wasn't many people keen to go up against the state, were there?
I don't know. I mean, it came on at short notice, so I was just concentrating on that. But there are other bizarrities over here in relation to the bar. Firstly, I think I'm the only person who did anything for free for the outside the remit of legal aid for the victims and victims. And secondly, we're now in this bizarre position where not one but two major sets of proceedings and recoveries are being made, not only in relation to Haute Le Grain, but I think it's the second one, there's another one, the Bailhache going on. It's being run by lawyers from outside the island.
The redress scheme, the redress scheme has been administered by the law, unbelievably, the Law Officers Department, but the Le Chien survivors are by Alan Collins, a UK lawyer.
He's a UK lawyer.
That's right, yeah.
I mean, my colleagues do what they're supposed to do under the legal aid scheme and don't take that away from them. But to the best of my knowledge, I'm the only person who ever stepped up to the plate and said, well, hold on a minute, can I help?
And of course, that's not your expertise.
It's miles from what I do on a daily basis, so I was not best suited for it.
We're going a little bit off track again, but the big question is, why has no law firm over here taken up the cause, people with the expertise, for the survivors over all these years?
Well, look at the toxic environment that we live in. Look at the toxic media. Look at the Jersey Think set, which is don't rock the boat, pretend that everything's wonderful, and hope that it all goes on another day. It's not brave stuff.
So getting back to the bailiff's speech, his retiring speech,
and the intimidation that goes with it from the judiciary. It's not good.
Isn't the problem here, or part of the problem, that the bailiff, indeed all Crown officers, are completely unaccountable? They can say and do as they please, unless, of course, as mentioned in your Carswell statement, your submission to Carswell, things get a little bit too embarrassing for Whitehall. So basically, isn't it that the bailiffs, law officers, or Crown officers do what the hell they please because they answer to nobody? Isn't that the problem, and why the bailiff could say what he said that day in the States?
Yes, that is the problem, and there's been a sea change over the years that I've been here dealing with these things. Remember that obviously Philip Bailhache was held to account, and that's why he lost his job. But and I've had meetings in the House of Lords and in the House of Commons, and I've met numerous people in England relative to the island. The old regime was that the UK, and let's explain what the UK does and doesn't do in a minute, did take responsibility and realised that they had a role to play. Now, what's happened is that once they realise they've got responsibility and they've got a role to play, there was an answer to a question by Jack Straw in the House of Commons. He said, yes, we do have responsibilities. They have done their very best to stop taking responsibility.
For the Crown dependencies?
Yep. Well, I don't know about the other ones, but certainly Jersey. I met with Jack Straw years ago. He candidly admitted that they played a role and had a role, and obviously they did play a role in those days. That has changed, and you've got to remember that we've had the collapse of UK good governance as anybody would normally understand it, whilst they all sort of pull themselves apart over whatever it is that they're doing at the moment.
Brexit.
Brexit. Before that, they decided to exterminate the bits of the working class by having austerity, didn't they? That sort of thing. That's slow motion genocide to me. Very vicious stuff going on. We're seeing a sort of 1930s, shades of the 1930s all over the place. America got Trump, we got Bailhaches.
So I suppose I've got to ask, is...
So the accountability is still there in constitutional terms. So, in broad terms, Her Majesty, who appoints these people, is responsible for them behaving themselves. Breakdowns in proper governance over here are the responsibility of HMG.
And they do have the constitutional obligation to legislate for Jersey.
They have all the obligations and all the responsibility. That's where the buck stops. But they do their best to do nothing about it. They will not correspond. I've got buckets of correspondence on all this. And basically, absent a UK media campaign, they're not going to do very much. They are almost unembarrassable. I've met with lieutenant governors over the years, many of them. The better ones cringe. I mean, it was very interesting. I haven't met the present one. The camera work during William Bailhache's speech. There was a lot of focus on the lieutenant governor, who just didn't want to be in that room. You could see him cringing internally and then trying to hold it together. I mean, these guys are military, ex-military. They hold it together pretty well, but he must know in his heart of hearts it's appalling. So, I've met with them before, and they just sort of just can't say anything to you. They can't justify it.
So, I mean, how embarrassing does it have to get, for Whitehall or or London or the Crown to step in? How embarrassing do things have to get?
Well, we now have unembarrassable politicians. I mean, the normal codes of conduct in the United Kingdom have gone out the door with the present mob. I mean, there's no two ways about it. They don't just do not conform to even lip service on ethics in public office, responsibility, and so on and so forth. There's that populist surge going on in the UK, which is happening, unfortunately, elsewhere in Europe.
Because all this, the possibly illegal suspension of the Chief of Police, we know from the Care inquiry, it was done on a pack of lies and all this. All this has been done under the watchful eye of the Queen's representative over here, the Lieutenant Governor.
Yep.
So how is this all still held? Why hasn't the Lieutenant Governor done his job and said to the Queen, hang on a minute, you need to step in over here, that they're out of control?
I think that's a question I can't answer for them. You'd have to answer them. But you may remember in my evidence to the Care inquiry, I had a very carefully prepared file note, because when the inquiry was getting underway, I had a meeting with the Lieutenant Governor. I was very worried about various aspects of how blanket was being thrown over it. And he was so on board with the local cover-up, it was mind-boggling. Go back to that file note. It was absolutely astonishing, because when I raised it, he said, oh, well, the victims are being manipulated by this dreadful person called Sivray. Now, that was the government line, that was the judiciary's line, that was the line across the board, and this was playing out. I mean, I watched it play out in this room with a victim who got exactly the same thing within 3 days from her legal aid lawyer, who gave her the same bunch of nonsense, and she was one of the more severely abused victims. You and I both know who she was. I don't think it helps for me to go into the names of it, but that played out. You could see the sort of, this is the party line, that the victims are being manipulated, for political ends. You wonder what the political ends were. The political ends were, excuse me, some horrible things happened to these poor people. We've failed them as a society. We've failed them in our institutions. Why isn't somebody doing a bit more about it? But that's bad politically, because Jersey PLC doesn't like it.
So basically, because it goes back to what Graham Power sort of mentioned once before, I think, if I remember, he said it seems that the Lieutenant Governor, for instance, is supposed to be over here representing the interests of the Crown. It seems now that they're actually representing the interests of the Jersey establishment.
Absolutely. I mean, that's been my take on it. I mean, I see my file notice, it must be my take on it for some time, and if it were different, you would be seeing the Lieutenant Governor. I've offered this to them before. I said, well, don't rely on the guff that you're given. Why don't you build your own intelligence gathering mechanism? And that's not complicated to do, particularly for people with their sort of resource. It'd be quite simple. I've told them how. As I said, do you want to? I'll tell you how to do it. I'll tell you where to look. No, I don't want to know.
It's all keep quiet, keep the status quo, keep the
I think the reality for Jersey is that somebody in the Treasury has probably had a quiet word and says, well, money goes into the City of London from Jersey, so leave it alone, and the ordinary people in Jersey are completely expendable.
So going back,
it's colonialism.
So going back to the speech, if you like, both Rico Sorda and I have said for years that Jersey needs to be released from the stranglehold of the Bailhache brothers. The island needs to be able to breathe again. Is it the Bailhache brothers who are the problem, or is it the office of bailiff that's the problem? Are things, in your opinion, going to be any different under the rule of Tim Lecoq? So is it a Bailhache brother problem, Is it a bailiff problem that we have on the island?
Both. I think the Bailhache brothers are all going to be seen by history as being a very dark moment for the island. It's not a moment, it's about 20 odd years of it, isn't it? It's been very, very bad for the island. I think that logically you can put together the desolation and destruction that they have brought in their wake, both politically and judicially. It's very poor stuff. And I mean, I've had to deal with the aftermath of people. It's very, very upsetting to people who have heard to see people in that much distress. So yes, I think that they were poor examples of that office.